So this next one that I have, I thought was really neat, and I'll give as best as I can a perspective on this. It has to do with the raw teachings, the law of one body of work and materials. I have a video out there, Law of One, that I did reference a lot of those comments and inserts or quotes from some of the Law of One materials. There's actually a great website out there that has it categorized almost like a dictionary that you can type in any thought, and anything from all of those channeled materials will pop up. Now, I do want to basically highlight the fact that I just said channeled materials. And within that, I want to give credence to the fact that those channelings that came through were really quite profound for the consciousness of humanity. They did anchor in something that I feel really helped expand our consciousness to be able to receive some of the other information that came later. And as we can just give a recognition to that, we can now realize we're sitting at a different place of consciousness now, which is what we would call spiritual adulthood with discernment. So we can begin to look at a lot of it and realize that not all of it is stuff that we're going to take and take at face value as exactly what it is, but it's still a really great energy to cross reference. So this particular person was asking that they were saying they read the Law of One before finding the freedom teachings, and I noticed a big difference. For example, Ra talks about the harvest being now and the polarities of 95% negativity or 45% positivity in order to move on. Otherwise, your soul is being recycled and moves on to another third density planet somewhere else. He talks about how Earth is moving into fourth density since 2012. And this differs much from the CDT plates. And I think this is great because, again, this is where we want to recognize information can only come through at the level of where things are in that now. And if you even look at the freedom teachings of the Voyagers books, you're going to see a whole lot of discrepancies within there that says, oh, well, the stellar activation cycles said they were going to happen at this time. But we live in an organic system that isn't locked into these history books. So the information doesn't come through and then basically nothing's happening. So guess we're going to go through ascension. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of activity. There's a lot of activity from these Leviathan races, these Tothian races. There's a lot of negative alien agenda that is thwarting and still throwing a bunch of wrenches in the whole process of what is going on. So within that, as much as we can look at information coming through, we're going to have to still recognize that timelines are organic. They're not stagnant. They're not an absolute. They are actually a moving probability. Okay. I hope that makes sense. And within this, kind of recognizing when you look at the Law of One and the raw materials, oh, and I don't have it off the top of my head what page this would have been in the Voyagers books. But you would almost see this as, oh, and pardon me, I really wish I had the name on the top of my head. There was and it was the Raw Confederacy. It was the Raw Collective. Okay. So the Raw Confederacy or the Raw Collective within the Voyagers books, during some of the times that the Hall of Amenti had to be moved out, the sphere had to be moved out. Well, and this has to do with the Templar seals and the Templar axiom seals. So remembering that there are Templar races that became hybridized and they started to have genetic mutations within their field. So there were seals put on them so that they couldn't go through the Stargate, so that they wouldn't bring their mutated genetics up into the net through the Stargate into the next density plane. Okay. So when that happened at the time of death, this is where a lot of the Egyptian thing comes from for seeing if your heart is as light as a feather. This is coming from those timelines where at that time of transition or death, when the soul was moving through, basically the Raw Confederacy was placed in a position of basically looking through the energy field in order to make sure, did they still have any Templar seals on them? Had they actually accelerated their codes or their frequencies to the pace that they needed to? And if they weren't, then they weren't allowed to move through. So it was perceived later as Judgment Day, that you were going to be judged, but it had nothing to do with being judged whether you were good enough or you were bad enough. And the concept of, if you don't raise your vibration, you'll end up in another 3D planet somewhere else. That has everything to do with whatever level consciousness you are. And this is in a lot of the Bardo teachings, the Tibetan teachings. We talked about this a lot in the Legacy of the Soul. Wherever your consciousness is at the time of death, your consciousness stream will attune to that frequency field, and you will be gravitationally pulled into like an incarnational field that matches that frequency vibration. So if one is living at a particular base frequency, we could say it, maybe a very 3D life, the chances of them moving into a Buddhic realm are very, very, very slim if they haven't been putting any thought into wanting a tune to deity planes or Buddhic realms or higher dimensional planes. What makes their consciousness think they're going to move to that plane? Because there's nothing in there in that trajectory to pull their consciousness stream to that. So yes, there is going to be a lot of individuals that wherever their consciousness stream is at within this incarnation or at the time of death, is they're going to find another place that matches that frequency to incarnate into another life cycle, whether it's Earth or somewhere else. So, honestly, as we're talking about this, there's actually a lot more parallels and correlations between, even this topic right here, because, when we look, obviously the densities don't match up. The way the Law of One teachings talk about the densities doesn't match up into how we look at harmonic universes or densities within the 12 tree grid of life. They don't, the mathematics are different, but if you ever remember those channelings and the way they came through, they always said, they repeated over and over and over again, our ability to translate certain things down to your density is really, really difficult. So a lot of times there's just things that are mistranslated in the way that we have the ability to share it with you. So within this, what I would say is that both of them have a foundational energy that aligns to living through the law of one, and an energy that says, hey, it's like the more you seek that within, the more you're actually going to start to change your vibrations or your levels of consciousness to move into different planes of creation. And the whole idea of the harvest, honestly, I would have to look up the page, but if you go into the Voyagers books, this is going to be Voyagers 2, and you just put in the search bar. So click Control F on your tab to do the find, and type in there the word harvest. It'll take you right to that section within the Voyagers books that's going to match, I think, a lot of this conversation within here. And within that, just to know that there's been a lot of soul recycling that has gone on. Some of it is just the fact that a soul didn't wake up and it's just still vibrating at a particular level. So it just magnetically gets pulled back into the same earth plane because it didn't accelerate its photonic body, or sorry, the plasma body strong enough to break the seal, to break that Vibody seal and get out. So within that, we want to recognize that, I think in a lot of ways, now that I'm really kind of reading and talking about this, the Law of One teachings kind of are just looking at it from a very small window of perspective. And there's a lot that can be taken with discernment from both sets of teachings. I use a lot of the freedom teachings or the Voyagers books or the new materials even. I do dive into some of those as far as sharing mainly as tools to kind of back up or give things as a resonance to share with what we're talking about. But by all means, by me utilizing information from other platforms doesn't mean that it's coming without saying you're still responsible for using your discernment. I'm responsible for using my discernment. Pick and choose what works, let go of the rest, recognizing there's always going to be little things that we could nitpick that aren't quite right, but the quicker you can just sift those aside, you just grab what works and move on. So